so this advice is the same for my menopausal or perimenopausal women, as well as blokes who come in or younger people, because essentially the recovery is still the same. The main difference with ladies who are having changes with their estrogen levels is that the response is more variable. And yes, that's frustrating because sometimes you might know somebody else who's coming in with an Achilles injury, for example, and they might get better quicker than you. And you've just got to, unfortunately, understand that as our estrogen levels change with menopause and perimenopause, that it's normal to have varying responses to management, particularly to strength training. So when somebody comes into the clinic and they're acutely painful, so that means that they are limping, or if they're coming in with very bad morning pain is a common thing, or if their shoulders, which is a common one in perimenopause and menopause, their shoulders are very painful to move even slightly out to the side, and I've had a scan and it's shown a partial tear, for example. The first thing I've got to do is get their pain under control, and that's super important. And it can involve also assistance with the GPs if it's required. Sometimes that may also use anti-inflammatory medication. Obviously that's not something that we have encouraged people to be on for a long period of time, and it does depend on people's other medical needs, because some people are contraindicated to have anti-inflammatory medication. So that's often liaising with the GP to manage their pain in the acute phase, because often for people, if they've got a tendon issue, particularly for their legs, so they're limping, that limp can also cause other problems and can almost become like a self-actualizing cause of pain for the client. So pain control is the first thing that I focus on in that initial assessment. Apart from getting a good diagnosis, it's pain control. I also get people to do isometric exercises. And so with isometric exercises, that is when you are doing a long hold. So an example for the biceps tendon is literally lifting up and getting them to hold a weight in this position for a long period of time. Minimum 15 seconds, but some clients, depending on their level of severity, I might get them to do a lighter weight for 45 seconds. Part of the reason why we do the isometric exercises is because they've been proven to reduce pain. And as I said, that's the key focus that I've got for my clients in their acute phase of tendon injury. So the isometrics is generally what I would leave people with in that first session. And you don't worry too much if there's a little bit of pain while the isometric exercise is being done. It's more you worry about how it responds after, like later in the day. Once I've seen people once or twice in the acute phase, I've got their pain under control, usually with the help of medication, they'll move into the subacute phase. Okay, so depending on how long their injury has been around for, this subacute phase can honestly last for several months. And I know that sounds depressing because most of us want to just come to the physio and be fixed like that, but the reality is that it can be very slow, particularly if your hormones are changing, as I said before, with the menopause and perimenopause. So with the subacute phase, what I'm looking at is getting the joint range of movement going well, and also importantly so that you're actually moving in nice movement patterns. Okay, so that might mean if you've got a shoulder tendinopathy, I might be really focusing on getting the shoulder blade moving well, and the shoulder blade is not injured, but the tendons around that shoulder blade are affected, and by loosening up the shoulder blade it can help with getting that range of movement, which is so important for tendon recovery in this phase here. I also at this stage really hone in on the other factors that might be contributing to the tendinopathy. So what I'm meaning by that is, for example, if somebody has an Achilles tendon problem, I might be looking at whether they've got foot stiffness that could be impacting the movement in around that ankle joint, or potentially higher up the kinetic chain, like if their glutes are not activating well, it might be putting more strain through the calf complex than what should be happening when you're walking or if you're running, for example. So I'll really look at the other factors. And part of the reason for that is because I know this subacute phase can often lag, it can take quite a while to get through. So you need to be really working on those things that have potentially caused the tendon issue. Whenever I'm looking at tendon issues when they haven't had a cause, and what I mean by that is, if you've in our legs, for example, I mean, you're not walking just on your right leg, are you? I mean, you've always got to be making as many steps with your left leg as your right leg. So in that example, if you only end up with a tendon issue on one leg, we've got to work out why. And usually it's because that leg has been loading up differently than the other leg. So it might even be coming from your back. Even some people, I've had it and it's really been coming from their neck because their head sits like this because they've spent 15 years on the phone with their work. They have to do a lot of phone work, and then that becomes, all right, well, we've got to look at ways to straighten up your body, because even all the way through this subacute phase, we're just going to keep hitting roadblocks every time we increase loading. In terms of the actual injury site, I'll continue with the isometric exercises that we did before because they're usually really good for managing pain. But I'll also add in that cons means concentric exercises, which means through the range of movement, and this is when I'm really adding in some strength stuff. I'm pushing the weight at this stage. I'm wanting my clients to be getting strong, okay? You will not improve from a tendon injury in this subacute phase if you keep doing tiny little weights. We'll be really building up the strength. So you'd be wanting, and if you're comparing left to right, if it's a one-sided issue, but you'd be really wanting to start hitting some improvements with your strengthening through range of movement. Once they move past the subacute phase, so they now don't have much pain, and like I said, this stage can be a few months. Once they've moved to the point where there's minimal pain as an issue, that's when we really focus on continuing with the heavy load stuff that we started here, but we also want to add in some different paces. Okay, so this is where these different paces is where we're going to get improvements for the tendon long term in terms of being able to manage different things that happen to us day to day. So, for example, for an Achilles, I might be adding hopping at this stage. And you'd be wanting not just hopping forward, you'd also be wanting left, right, because we want that tendon to be able to manage differences in the tension left to right, which you're not really going to get that with just doing up and down calf raises, for example. All right, and so for the shoulder, you'd be not just going in the forward plane, you'd also be going into different rotation levels, just so that the joint starts to get different ways that it can move in a healthy way, and that it can tolerate loading in those different positions. And I just find that helps to build a really resilient tendon into the long term. I'll show you an example of the different types of activation and strengthening. So Cassie's going to grab a weight. As I said with tendons, it needs to be a heavy weight. You need to remember that it's about strengthening that tissue, and without enough load, it will not be able to strengthen. It needs to be given the stimulus for it to happen. So we've got 14 kilos here. Alright, so she's just going to have that there in her hand, and she's going to show us an isometric. So you don't have to overthink it with isometric. Literally, it is lifting up and holding. Okay? And if you're able to, Cassie, I'll get you take one leg off. Okay? So there, and then hold. Okay? Depending on how irritable the tendon is what I will use to determine how long I'll get the client to be in this position for. Obviously, you'll need to be tested before you know the exact amount, but generally it wouldn't be less than 15 seconds, maybe up to 45. Some people are up to 60 seconds, but it depends on their level of pain. Because usually if they're able to achieve 60 seconds, they've probably moved into the subacute phase, and we're adding in range of movement stuff as well. So you can see here, Cassie has lifted up, she's beyond neutral in through here. But another thing I often do when people are doing isometric exercise is getting them to do in different ranges. So if you could just lift up a little bit higher there, so you can get end of range there, and sorry I'm being pretty mean right now, and then drop down a little bit, and so you can do mid range as well. And then if you just go to neutral there, because we're over a step, even holding neutral can be very effective, and in somebody who's got a very irritable tendon, that's a great place to start. Alright, so you have a break there now. So that's generally the first lot of exercises that I'll be giving people, and the weight very much depends on the person. I know that Cassie is quite strong. Some examples of concentric exercises. So these are full range of movement, are over the edge of a step and lifting up and down. So and often we'll get people doing this in slightly different paces, but it's going through that full range of movement. Okay, so with 14 kilos, I wouldn't expect Cassie to do this particularly fast, but if you place the weight down there, Cassie, you can also get people to do it in slightly different paces. So you can see with her, we'd probably get her doing some slow pace, concentric up and down with a heavy weight, and then we'd also be getting her to do some normal body weight where she can go a little bit faster. Okay, so it just stimulates the tissue in different ways, which encourages that healing, and just, I'm always thinking about building the resilience of the tendon in this stage, and particularly given this subacute stage can last for several months, you really do want to get different stimulus, which just helps to build up those, the good tendon. So, with the long-term exercises, they'll continue as we've just shown with the concentric exercises, but we'll also be adding in different paces. So we won't worry about the weight for this one, we'll just show the hopping. And so with the hopping, what I'm going to get you to do, Cassie, is just there, and we're going to, taking one leg off, and do some hopping, 1, 2, 3, forward. Yep, so there, 2, 3, okay, and then walk back, and then what we'll do is we'll do 3 on the spot. Okay, as high as you can on the spot, going up nicely. Okay, so I'm unsure if you can see this so well in the picture, but this uses the tendon in different ways. If you're going forward, you're going to be getting a lot of hip and knee helping that task, but the Achilles still does work. But when you're going straight up, the vertical hop, it uses a lot of the Achilles tendon, and it also uses a lot of foot as well, because you haven't got as much drive directly up from your quadriceps muscles or glutes with this task. So it's really important to get those different types of activation. You're not just hopping forward or on the spot. And another thing that's really important is also doing different directions. So if you could just show us going like a grapevine kind of thing, left and right over a line, you'll see with each different angle, she'll be pushing off from either the inside or the outside of her Achilles tendon. Okay, so this phase obviously is not for people who are getting regular pain. It's more for people who are getting to a point where they're either starting to run or wanting to do faster and heavier activities. Okay, so it's really important to move through them in a fluent way in regards to isometric and concentric. And I will do different types of activation as well. I've just shown you a really simple example here. But the important phase that a lot of people forget about, because their pain's usually down, is the different movement patterns for hopping and fast activities. So it might be throwing, for example, if it's a shoulder. But that's where a lot of people, they'll forget about this because they're no longer in pain, and then they often 6 months later will do something out of the ordinary, and then they'll come back and have pain again. They'll be rolling their eyes, about their tendon being sore again, but it's often because you haven't finished the rehab process. Thank you.